Senior officials of the Belarusian government have been placed under suspicion by the International Criminal Court in connection with a decision made in 2020 to forcibly expel political opponents of Lukashenko from the country. The ICC Prosecutor's Office has been conducting a preliminary investigation since September 30, 2024 at the request of Lithuania, the country to which critics of the regime were expelled. Although Belarus is not a member of the International Criminal Court, the court can investigate crimes if they affect a member country. The outcome of the investigation could be the issuance of arrest warrants.
There are reasonable grounds to believe that the course of actions leading to the deportation constituted a deliberate policy against real or perceived opponents of the Belarusian government, carried out in accordance with state policy or for its benefit. The office concluded that the alleged crimes committed by the authorities were encouraged or approved by the highest levels of power by us. From the statement of the ICC Prosecutor's Office,
Large-scale repressions have been ongoing in Belarus for over 5 years. Following the presidential elections in August 2020, the country was rocked by protests against the falsification of the results. Lukashenko regained the presidency, while his opponents were either imprisoned or forced to flee the country. Tens of thousands of people were arrested. More than 1,100 political prisoners remain in prison. According to rough estimates, up to 600,000 people have been forced to leave Belarus. Belarusian opposition leader Svetlana Tikhovskaya said that the International Criminal Court's decision gives hope for the restoration of the rule of law.
Hundreds of thousands of Belarusians have suffered and continue to suffer due to the regime's actions, and Lukashenko's policies pose a threat to Belarus, neighboring countries as well. This decision restores hope that legality will be restored, that the guilty will be held accountable, and that the victims will have the right to truth and justice. Svetlana Tikhovskaya, leader of the Belarusian opposition, wrote on Telegram.
Let us recall that earlier Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko stated that the overthrow of his regime through an operation similar to the one carried out by the United States in Venezuela against Nicolas Maduro is impossible. In Belarus, Lukashenko has long since exchanged Belarus' sovereignty for the inviolability and immovability of his personal power. He has not only made the country an accomplice to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but is also helping Moscow deploy troops and circumvent sanctions. According to the Ukrainian foreign minister, the decision of the International Criminal Court sends a strong signal that there will be no impunity even for those who consider themselves above the law and any standards of humanity.
We welcome the step taken by the International Criminal Court to launch an investigation led by Lithuania into the crimes of the Lukashenko regime against the people of Belarus. Ukraine has long advocated for the regime to be held accountable for both the crimes committed against its own people and for its support for Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Justice is a prerequisite for a better European and democratic future for Belarus. Andriy Sybiza, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, on the social network X.
Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Kyiv has been pushing for the creation of a special court to investigate the leadership of the aggressor state, including dictator Putin. Ukraine expects to complete the organizational preparation of the special court to try the crime of aggression of the Russian Federation this year. President Volodymyr Zelensky announced this.
In the Netherlands, work continues on the creation of a court on Russia's aggression, and we expect that the court will be organizationally ready this year.
Belarus is increasingly involved in the expansion and prolongation of the war against Ukraine. If there is insufficient pressure on Minsk, the situation will not change. Analysts are convinced. Lukashenko himself openly declares that Belarus has always been oriented towards the Russian Federation, both economically and politically. And according to him, there is no force capable of separating Belarus from Russia or Russia from Belarus. Victoria Chastoina for the Freedom TV channel.
We are joined by Pavel Latushko, Deputy Chairman of the Unified Transitional Cabinet of Belarus, Head of the People's Anti-Crisis Administration, Belarusian oppositionist, politician, and diplomat. Welcome to Freedom, and long live Belarus, long Asag.
Live Ukraine forever. Glory to Ukraine. Good evening.
Glory to the heroes. Abel Pavlovich, do you know, when I saw this news, I remembered an unforgettable day. It is February 24, 2022, and then I was forced to go to the shelter for the first time, Katia, because many helicopters were flying from the territory of Belarus to Kyiv, and flying over the Kyiv, and flying over the Kyiv reservoir. And in general, that morning began with the column that also came out of Belarus, the same one that was planned to put Kyiv even through Kyiv in 3 days. I mean, I personally have questions for the Belarusian regime, for Lukashenko. And how did you receive this news that the AA is initially interested in Lukashenko?
Well, I didn't just receive it. My team and I worked on it very specifically. In fact, this is precisely our initiative. In 2023, the Anti-Cis People's Administration, which I had, approached the Lithuanian Ministry of Justice to consider the possibility of contacting the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court under Article 4 of the Rome Statute of the ICC. We presented a legal strategy and worked together with the Lithuanian civil law company, Justas. It is currently headed by Daniele Limasen. And we argue that the crimes committed on the territory of Belarus, crimes of persecution for dissent for political opinions, and not necessarily only against opponents of power, have a massive, organized, systematic and recurrent character. And all this is organized at the level of the highest leadership of the country. These crimes lead to deportation, and in this way, we found a formula to be able to use the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. All this was analyzed by our partners in Lithuania, the Ministry of Justice, as well as by the Lithuanian government. They also involved British lawyers in this process, and as a result, this formula was accepted, and September 30, 2024 was an important day for us. Lithuania turned to the prosecutor's office to start studying this situation, the Belarusian situation. And this week, really, it is a great victory. On March 12, the prosecutor's office evaluated the legal strategy that we initiated, and that was presented by the Lithuanian government. At a certain stage of collecting evidence, we were assisted by 5 international and Belarusian human rights organizations to whom we are deeply grateful. They assessed and said that there are grounds to believe that these crimes of deportation and coercion are taking place both on the territory of Belarus and on the territory of one of the member states of the Rome Statute, in this case, Lithuania. In this case, why only Lithuania? Because it was Lithuania that submitted the referral to the prosecutor's office. Now, for us, of course, and it is very important that this request is supported by other countries. Then we will ensure that all victims of these large-scale and mass crimes, and in our justification, we show that at least 600,000 Belarusians were forced to leave the country. This is 6.4% of the country's total population over these years are accounted for, so that all victims have the right to justice, to protection of their rights. I hope we have already seen the reaction, albeit only public at the moment, of the foreign ministers of Latvia, Estonia, and the foreign minister of Ukraine, whom you mentioned, Kasarane. Thank you very much. But we are also waiting for the corresponding formal requests, the notification addressed to the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court that they join this decision, says Sampesa. Of course, it is important for us that Poland is also here. Hundreds of thousands of victims reside in Poland, in Germany. There are at least 10,000 victims there. On the territory of Lithuania, according to our estimates, there are 70,000 victims of deportation. And of course, it is important for us to cover the entire context so that the prosecutor, when making his assessment, considers the entire situation as a whole. And what will happen now? In fact, the investigation has already begun. Of course, we will continue to transmit the relevant materials together with human rights organizations. When a criminal investigation is already underway, the prosecutor has the right, based on the evidence gathered, to assess and identify specific persons responsible, suspected of committing the crime, and to open criminal cases. Right now, you are showing Lukashenko. He will be the first precedent. A criminal case will appear in the International Criminal Court with a specific number and date against citizen Lukashenko. The next one could be or even the first one, or maybe both at once. Karpenkov, the commander of the internal troops of Belarus and the deputy minister of internal affairs. But I will not determine the list. That is determined by the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. But there are very good reasons to believe that, given that the prosecutor said that all this was organized as a state policy at the highest level, who then made all these decisions? Of course, it was Lukashenko who made them. So we assume that criminal cases could be opened against several high-ranking officials. After that, the prosecutor goes to the pretrial chamber of the International Criminal Court. And this chamber can authorize the prosecutor to issue an arrest warrant, which is what we expect. By the way, you mentioned the situation in Ukraine. That is also important. Our team of the People's Anti-Crisis Administration has been collecting evidence of the act of aggression committed from the territory of Belarus for half a year now. This is about the cession of territory that you mentioned on February 24, 2022. And I, as a delegate of the Coordination Council to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, submitted an amendment to the resolution of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, even before the creation of the Special Court, before the signing of the agreement, establishing that the so-called High Military Political Command of Belarus bears responsibility for the act of aggression against Ukraine. This amendment was unanimously adopted by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. That is why we now have every reason to collect evidence and hand it over to Ukraine. I think that, of course, Ukraine also has a huge amount of evidence, and it is high time to raise the issue of Lukashenko's responsibility for the aggression. You also know that our team, the People's Anti-Crisis Administration, already in 2023 submitted 2 communications to the Prosecutor's Office of the International Criminal Court. And I personally met with the deputy prosecutor on the fact of illegal transfer of Ukrainian children, the Index 13, across the territory of Belarus, no less than 3,500 from 20 localities in Ukraine. By the way, this case has been ongoing for a long time, so I hope that Ukraine will also support us. Here, it will be possible to simply issue an arrest warrant against Lukashenko. I do not think that any further investigation is needed here. I, from meeting with the deputy prosecutor, know that an analytical group was created there that evaluated all this. There are documents signed by Lukashenko. The financial documents for the evacuation of children have been signed. We have found children in the process of adoption on the territory of the Russian Federation, so we are working in 3 directions. There is even a 4th one that I will not talk about. That is currently secret because we are also working confidentially with Lithuania, but there will also be a 4th, quite decisive step against the regime.
We will be following the news, but I do understand that history is forming here, that the International Criminal Court already has an arrest warrant for Putin and specific charges against him. This is in addition to the cases that prosecutors are also investigating now. And in the case of Lukashenko, how is it here? Let's say in relation to Putin's case, can this be considered an aggravating circumstance, right? Because it is a State of the Union that essentially helps the aggressor, or are these completely separate examples now for the ICJ?
The investigation launched by the prosecutor on the 12th concerns exclusively crimes committed in the form of persecution and deportation against citizens of Belarus. These are crimes against humanity. When we talk about crimes against children, that is a war crime. These are 2 separate criminal cases and investigations conducted by the prosecutors of the International Criminal Court. That is why this is a separate case that is important for us Belarusians, because justice is essential for hundreds of thousands of victims, and Lukashenko continues to imprison people every day. He deports people from the country every day. The persecution does not stop. As for the situation with children, that case has been ongoing for some time, and there is a separate evidentiary base, a huge evidentiary base. Then they joined us. We had a confidential cooperation agreement with Jelly University, and JLL has submitted a corresponding report confirming and expanding our evidence. I know that other initiatives, including Ukrainian ones, have also submitted them. By the way, we submitted these materials to the Prosecutor General's of Ukraine, so all the evidence is in, both the Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine and the Prosecutor's Office. Here, a decision could be made as early as tomorrow. Well, as for the aggression, we are waiting for the creation of a special court and are already working on collecting the evidentiary base. So Lukashenko, theoretically, of course, I would like it to be so, could accumulate more orders than even the head of the Kremlin.
And in fact, in this sense, Putin could learn something from Lukashenko in terms of staying in power. Lukashenko is probably the absolute leader in this sense in the post-Soviet space. Pavel Pavlovich, in general, we have seen examples, right, when some prisoners were released. This happened, among other things, after Kizkelo's visit to Belarus. They also had certain contacts with Lukashenko, weren't they? This is where this comes from. Could this be an attempt now to soften the issues that arise towards the Belarusian dictator?
For now, this is a game. If we talk about today, Saturday afternoon, it is absolutely a game, a fake game by Lukashenko towards the Americans. If it is very important that people are released, it is important that well-known politicians are released. But Drisko, for example, the Americans mentioned the figure that thanks to their efforts, 342 people were released. We are grateful to the Americans for this, yes. But at the same time, during the same period of negotiations, 609 people were recognized as political prisoners. In fact, you can read my tweet today, there are 11 more political prisoners there again. In other words, the number keeps growing. It's like an assembly line. Today, according to human rights defenders, there are 1,150 political prisoners. And Nobel Prize winner Alex Bialatski, who was released, by the way, in the last group, says that we can't really say how many political prisoners there are in the country today. The courts are closed, the hearings are held behind closed doors, all human rights defenders are either imprisoned or deported, lawyers are not practicing, lawyers sign confidentiality agreements. So in reality, there are many more. So at the moment, Lukashenko is deceiving the Americans. This has been going on for a year now. Next week, the special representative of the US President, John Cole, is scheduled to travel to Minsk to negotiate with Lukashenko. Lukashenko, of course, in my opinion, should flee as soon as possible, given how unconventional Trump's foreign policy is. And we see examples of Maduro and what happened with Khamenei and what is happening now in Cuba. I think Lukashenko needs to make serious decisions to release hundreds of politicians, because Trump has twice, both in a telephone conversation and on Truth Social, publicly written that he expects the release of 100 political prisoners in Belarus. If Lukashenko continues to fool the Americans, I think the Americans may react quite nervously, watching how his policy is being carried out. He is taking a gamble. He is playing with fire, you know? Right now, he has a lot of demands from all sides. He wants to trade with Europe because the economic situation is difficult, but Europe demands that it change the human rights situation and the hybrid war and stop supporting aggression against Ukraine. He wants to deal with the Americans, but the Americans tell him release all political prisoners. And he is afraid of how his police will react to the security forces, how Russia will react. Russia tells him, come closer to us if you want to sign the gas deal, which has not yet been signed, and the industry is collapsing, and he doesn't know what else to sell of his sovereignty because he is already mortgaged and resold everything. He wants to get along with China, but China tells him, stop waging a hybrid war against the European Union. Yeah. You are hindering our transit, but he cannot stop waging a hybrid war because he is a vindictive person. He takes revenge on the Europeans. He takes revenge, and on the other hand, Putin tells him he provokes on the border of the European Union. Right now, he is, in a kind of a bind. He has demands from all sides. And how can he respond to all these demands with minimal decision-making capacity? But he himself has gotten himself into this dead end. Today, Belarus, thanks to Lukashenko, is in a dead end. Or Lukashenko is in a dead end in the middle of Europe. How is he going to get out of this? In principle, he could start doing it, but for that, he would have to change his own inner feelings. I don't know, his attitude towards everything. He is capable of doing that. We will hardly see, but we will see. Maybe some kind of intuition works here.
Well, yes, we will follow all this closely. Pavel Pavlovich, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. It is always a pleasure to have you in front. Pavel Latushko, Deputy Chairman of the United Transitional Cabinet of Belarus, head of the People's Anti-Crisis Administration, Belarusian oppositionist.
Ucrania ha impuesto sanciones personales al mandatario bielorruso Alexander Lukashenko, así lo declaró el presidente de Ucrania, Volodymyr Zelensky. Las sanciones al líder bielorruso son por apoyar a Rusia contra Ucrania. El decreto que oficializa la decisión del Consejo de Seguridad y Defensa ucraniano ya figura en la web presidencial. Contempla bloqueo de activos, prohibición de entrada, retiro de condecoraciones y más restricciones para Lukashenko.
Alexander Lukashenko lleva ya bastante tiempo intercambiando la soberanía de Bielorrusia por la continuación de su poder personal, ayuda a los rusos a eludir las sanciones impuestas por el mundo debido a esta agresión, justifica la guerra rusa, y ahora aumenta su implicación en ampliar y prolongar la guerra. Por esto habrá consecuencias especiales.
Según Zelensky, en la segunda mitad de 2025, los rusos desplegaron en Bielorrusia retransmisores para controlar drones de ataque, aumentando la capacidad del país agresor para golpear el norte de Ucrania. Zelensky señaló que los ataques a la red energética y ferroviaria requirieron la colaboración directa de Minsk.
En diciembre, los Shahed atacaron un tren, una brigada de reparación, un puente ferroviario y un depósito de locomotoras. Como escribió el experto Sergei Flesh, estos ataques, posibles gracias a retransmisores en Bielorrusia, están dirigidos a la vía Kovel-Kiev. Su objetivo es detener la logística entre Ucrania y Polonia. Además, según el presidente de Ucrania, unas 3.000 empresas bielorrusas suministran piezas y equipos para misiles como el Oreshnik, y Lukashenko permitió su despliegue en Bielorrusia, lo que supone una amenaza para ucranianos y europeos, según su publicación. Vamos a trabajar conjuntamente con nuestros socios con el fin de que esto pueda tener un efecto global, escribió Zelensky.
Ucrania ha quemado oficialmente este puente. Volodymyr Zelensky firmó un decreto para imponer sanciones personales contra Alexander Lukashenko. Lo que durante mucho tiempo se pospuso por razones tácticas, en febrero se convirtió en un hecho jurídico. Kiev ya no finge que Minsk es solo un aliado involuntario del Kremlin. ¿Por qué se han impuesto sanciones precisamente ahora? ¿Qué es exactamente lo que se ha prohibido al dictador bielorruso? ¿Y cómo cambiará este paso la situación en las fronteras del norte de Ucrania? Ahora mismo vamos a analizar los detalles exclusivos del material de Glabred. Miren hasta el final. Les explicaremos por qué esta decisión tiene consecuencias mucho más profundas que simplemente congelar cuentas. ¡Empecemos! Y más información en nuestro reportaje. Mi nombre es Yevgen Sirov. Este es el canal Glabred. Suscríbanse y denle like. Empecemos. Según informa Glabred, la decisión del Consejo de Seguridad Nacional y Defensa se basa en pruebas irrefutables de apoyo directo a la agresión rusa durante los años 2024 a 2025. No se trata solo de proveer aeródromos y campos de entrenamiento, sino también munición bielorrusa y la reparación de blindados rusos en empresas del complejo militar industrial bielorruso. Según fuentes, la inteligencia sobre un nuevo grupo de tropas para presionar el norte de Ucrania fue lo que colmó el vaso. La imposición de sanciones es una señal clara para Kiev. La responsabilidad de la guerra no recae solo en Moscú. Lukashenko es oficialmente cómplice del agresor, eliminando obstáculos morales y políticos para la presión internacional sobre su régimen. El paquete de sanciones contra Lukashenko es de máxima severidad. Según el material, incluye el bloqueo total de activos en el territorio de Ucrania si se descubren a través de personas interpuestas o empresas pantalla. La prohibición de operaciones comerciales equivale a un embargo de facto sobre los restos de las exportaciones bielorrusas que aún podían llegar al mercado ucraniano. La suspensión del cumplimiento de obligaciones económicas y financieras. Se ha hecho especial hincapié en la prohibición del tránsito de cualquier recurso a través del territorio ucraniano. Esto crea enormes problemas logísticos para las empresas bielorrusas que intentaban utilizar esquemas grises para acceder a los mercados del sur. Ucrania cierra la última brecha para la dictadura de Minsk. Este paso tiene un significado simbólico colosal. Ucrania insta a sus socios occidentales a seguir este ejemplo y sincronizar las listas de sanciones. Hasta ahora, algunos países de la UE dejaban ventanas abiertas para el potasio bielorruso o la madera, esperando un debilitamiento de la posición de Minsk. Kiev de facto declara a Lukashenko ilegítimo no solo por las elecciones de 2020, sino también por los crímenes de guerra cometidos entre 2022 y 2026. Refuerza a las fuerzas democráticas bielorrusas y vuelve tóxica cualquier negociación a puerta cerrada entre Occidente y Lukashenko. Ahora el destino de Minsk se liga al del Kremlin. Las sanciones contra Lukashenko reconocen la realidad. Ucrania ya no cree en la coexistencia pacífica con un dictador que ha traicionado la vecindad. Esta decisión fortalece nuestra seguridad y limpia el campo jurídico de vínculos dudosos.